And events leading up to our entry into the war. Well, what are the causes? Why are we Americans on the march? Is it because of Pearl Harbor? Is that why we are fighting? Or is it because of Britain? Czechoslovakia. Norway. Poland. Holland. Greece. Belgium. Albania. Yugoslavia. Or Russia. Just what was it made us change our way of living overnight? What turned our resources, our machines, our whole nation into one vast arsenal, producing more and more weapons of war instead of the old materials of peace? What put us into uniform, ready to engage the enemy on every continent and every ocean? What are these two worlds of which Mr. Wallace spoke? The free and the slave. Let's take the free world first. Our world. How did it become free? Only through a long and unceasing struggle inspired by men of vision. Moses. Muhammad, Confucius, Christ. All believed that in the sight of God, all men were created equal. And from that there developed a spirit among men and nations, which is best expressed in our own Declaration of Freedom. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. It is the cornerstone upon which our nation was built and the ideal of all the great liberators. Washington, Jefferson, Garibaldi, Lafayette, Kosciuszko, Bolivar, Lincoln. Lighthouses, lighting up a dark and foggy world.
The government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Fighting, living, dying. For what? For freedom. That for which men have fought since time began. To be free.
Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty, or give me death.
But what of this other world? Here, men insisted that progress lay in killing freedom. Here, they were putting out the lighthouses, one by one. Here, the march of history was reversing itself. In Italy, it began when an ambitious rabble-rouser set his followers marching on Rome. The country, like every other country after the last war, was torn by political unrest, hard times, unemployment. Two courses were available to the Italian people. They could solve their problems in a free, democratic way, or they could let someone else do the solving for them. They made the tragic mistake of choosing the second course. They put their trust and faith in this one man. They believed he represented them. Actually, he planned to betray them for the selfish interests of himself and the group back of him, just as he had earlier betrayed those who first supported him. In Germany, another and even more forceful demagogue set his followers marching from the Munich beer hall. He, too, had the sinister opportunity to take advantage of post-war chaos. But he also had certain distinctive German characteristics to play on. To start with, the Germans have an inborn national love of regimentation and harsh discipline. He could give them that. The German army, and through them, the people, had never acknowledged German defeat in the last war and were anxious for revenge. That, too, he promised them. The wealthy and powerful industrialists were fearful of losing any of their wealth and power and were ready to back anyone who would retain it for them. He promised to take care of them, too. This man cunningly played all these ends against the middle and ruthlessly set out to murder the newborn German Republic. And you'd expect things to be done a little differently. They were. Here, not one man, but a gang disguised their little schemes as the will of the emperor. And to the Japanese people, the emperor is God. Taking advantage of their fanatical worship of the god emperor, it was no great trick to take away what little freedom they had ever known. Yes, in these lands, the people surrendered their liberties and threw away their human dignity. They gave up their rights as individual human beings. They became a part of a mass, a human herd. Although these countries were far apart and different in custom and in language, the same poison made them much alike. Each got a new uniform. In Italy, the new bosses wore black shirts. In Germany, the shirts were brown. In Japan, they hid behind the uniform of the army. But really, they belonged to a sinister secret society. Their symbol was a black dragon. The other fellows had to have a symbol, too. Germany, a swastika. In Italy, the old Roman symbol of the fasting. In Germany, they called the new order National Socialism, or Nazism. In Italy, they had a shorter word, fascism. In Japan, they had lots of names for it. The new era of enlightenment, the new order in Asia, the co-prosperity sphere. But no matter how you slice it, it was just plain old-fashioned militaristic imperialism. The Japs would get the prosperity, and the others would get the coal. They say trouble always comes in threes. Take a good close look at this trio. Remember these faces. Remember them well. If you ever meet them, don't hesitate.
Der eine wahrhaftige Weltenschauspotter sein. Und zweitens, Sie wollten, Herr...
Stop thinking and follow me, cried Hitler. I will make you masters of the world. And the people answered, Heil! Heil! Stop thinking and believe in me, bellowed Mussolini, and I will restore the glory that was Rome. And the people answered, Duce, Duce. Stop thinking and follow your God Emperor, cried the Japanese warlords, and Japan will rule the world. And the people answered, Banzai, Banzai. Each system was alike in that the constitutional law-making bodies gave up their power. The Reichstag in Berlin, the House of Deputies in Rome, the Diet in Tokyo. And these elected representatives became collections of stooges, rubber stamp organizations. Applauding on cue the words of the leaders. Each system did away with free speech and free assembly. Each system did away with a free press and substituted a press controlled by the party. Through their ministries of propaganda, each took complete control of the theater, the movies, the radio. Every cultural activity and every channel of information was controlled by the most important members of the party. Each did away with free courts and trial by jury, and substituted courts and judges run by the party. Each abolished labor unions and the rights of bargaining for wages.
Fertigmachen zur Meldung! Achtung! Abteilung 6, 310 mit 13114 beim Trambau. Danke. Heilder! Heilder! Lassen Sie weiterarbeiten. Weiterarbeiten!
And under the pretext of patriotism established a system of forced labor. Each enforced its decrees by an army of secret police who held the power of life and death over every individual. And for the few who still believed in freedom and said so, there was a ready answer.
Con una mazza si può imporre silenzio ai più grandi intelletti del mondo.
The greatest intellect in the world can be silenced with this. That is an exact translation of the words these black shirts cheer so lustily.
Sage nur so viel. Wenn ich das Wort Kultur höre, dann greife ich schon nach meinem Revolver.
Whenever I hear anyone mention the word culture, the first thing I do is reach for my gun. Yes, they had the answer. The blackjack and the gun. In Italy, they did it different.
in Japan. To their names can be added those of hundreds and thousands of others who stood in the way of the new order. Finally, there is only one obstacle left. The word of God and the word of Führers cannot be reconciled. Then God must go. I am absolutely clear in my own mind, and I think I can speak for the Führer as well, that both the Catholic and Protestant churches must vanish from the life of our people.
Thus spoke Dr. Alfred Rosenberg. And if you have any doubt that he spoke for his Führer, here is what happened. Thousands of other men of God, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, were persecuted, arrested, confined in concentration camps.
Our Führer is the intermediary between his people and the throne of God. Everything the Führer utters is religion in the highest sense. It is only on one or two exceptional points that Christ and Hitler stand comparison. For Hitler is far too big a man to be compared with one so petty.
All German classrooms.
Adolf Hitler ist unser Retter, unser Held, der edelste Führer auf der ganzen Welt. Für Hitler leben wir und wir sterben gerne wir. Für den Führer bis zum Tod, denn er ist unser Gott.
Yes, take children from the faith of their fathers and teach them the state is the only church. And the head of the state is the voice of God. way of life, or better, the way of death, in that other world. Now, what of our world, the democratic world? What did we want? What did we do about it? First of all, we wanted peace and security. And to prove our sincerity, in 1921, we initiated the Washington Disarmament Conference. This resulted in two vitally important treaties. One, to reduce the size of the British, Japanese, French, Italian, and American fleets. And the other, the Nine-Power Treaty, which guaranteed the integrity of China. And incidentally, one of the powers signing this was Japan. Later on, in 1929, we signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which was supposed to abolish war as a means of settling international disputes. This pact was signed by 47 nations, including Germany and Japan.
President, I have the honor of handing you the London Naval Treaty.
Faithful to our treaty obligations, we scrapped more than 60% of our naval tonnage, and our army was reduced to a standing force of 136,000 men, smaller than that maintained by the little state of Romania. We let our hopes for peace become so strong that they grew into a determination not to fight unless directly attacked. We let ourselves be influenced by those who said that we could find security through isolation. The confusion in our way of thinking is apparent in the slice of public opinion as it appeared in Pathé News in 1939.
Another war, and not for me. This time America should keep out, and I know I will. If war breaks out in Europe, I think that this country should heed the advice of its first president and avoid all foreign entanglement.
I haven't the slightest idea of European affairs.
In the event of war in Europe, I think we should stay out of it entirely. And all our efforts should be made to keep out of the fight. Let Europe fight her own battles. They mean nothing to us. We should mind our own business.
By all means, no.
Yes, fight.
No.
No.
Yes.
If my country calls, yes.
No.
We simply did not want to understand that our individual and national problems were, and always will be, dependent upon the problems of the whole world. And we had individual and national problems to worry about. Plenty of them. Just as Germany, Italy, and Japan had. But we faced them in a democratic way. We passed laws to give working men a chance to improve their lot. We established an insurance program for those without jobs. We began to give old folks protection against want and hunger. We organized the CCC to provide our young men with healthy and useful employment. A federal works program came into being and changed the face of our nation with new roads, bridges, schools. We built great new dams which brought the miracle of electricity to millions of our people. These were some of our accomplishments, but there were others not so creditable. We turned our backs on the League of Nations. We passed the Tariff Act to set a higher wall of isolation around us. We encouraged lawlessness with the farce of prohibition. But in spite of these mistakes, we never had a thought of losing our free institutions. John Q. Public still ran the country. He had his choice of voting for Dewey, Wilkie, Roosevelt, or anybody else. In Germany, they had the choice of voting for Hitler, or Hitler. Over here, John Q. still read what he pleased. And although he heard of books being burned in other countries, he would have laughed if anyone had told him his books would ever be burned. On Sunday, if he felt like it, John Q. went to any church he pleased. most of all, he got a kick out of seeing his kids grow up. The average American was quite unconscious of the fact that some people had this in mind for the little John Q.
Tasty, viel mehr, Jungs. Wird ja auch so da.
While their children were being trained to kill, John Q's kids were giving their pennies to help them have life. And when we saw these men in the newsreels, quite often we laughed. To us, they looked like characters in a musical comedy. But they weren't comic. They weren't funny. They were deadly serious. They were out for world conquest. And what made it doubly serious was that there were 70 million Japanese, 45 million Italians, and 80 million Germans, all hopped up with the same idea.
Deutsches Volk hilft dir selbst. Jeder soll helfen.
Their leaders told them that they were supermen. Herrenvolk, the Nazis called it. The master race, destined to rule all other peoples on Earth. Take a good look at these humorless men. These were to be the rulers of the ruling race.
Leben, auch ihr bürgerliches Dasein ist gesichert in diesem nationalsozialistischen Staat.
Obey us blindly, and you will attain your rightful place in the world. All other people will be your slaves. That's what they promised them. That Americans, Chinese, Russian, South Americans, all free peoples would work for them and make them rich. And how they ate it up. We shall restore the glory that was Rome. Today we rule Germany. Tomorrow the world. The Pacific is ours. It was inevitable that these countries should gang up on us. The little fellow is our pal, Kurosu, who smiled his way into our hearts in December 1941. Here he and his friends are busy carving up the world in advance, staking out their claims. Take a good look at these claims.
Here was the Italy that Mussolini took over in 1922. And almost his first act was to tell the Italians they were the rightful owners of Corsica, Nice, Savoia, Albania, Tunisia, Ethiopia, and a land corridor linking it with Libya. Later on, he had an even bigger dream. The old Roman Empire as it existed nearly 2,000 years ago. To dominate all the lands adjoining the Mediterranean. Mare Nostrum, our sea, they called it, just as the ancient Romans did.
As for the Japanese, they had some ambitions, too. By 1920, they had grabbed off Formosa, Korea, and the southern half of the island of Sakhalin. Then Baron Gishi Tanaka, the prime minister, carefully set down Japanese aims in a document called the Tanaka Memorial. It was presented to the emperor July 25th, 1927.
Here was their dream. Manchuria for raw materials. China for manpower. Then a triumphant march through Indochina, Siam, Burma, India, the East Indies, and on through Australia and New Zealand. And in the north, all they claimed was that part of Russia east of Lake Baikal. That was to be the new order in Asia. Then the Japs would move eastward to crush the United States and really start their co-prosperity sphere. Now take a look at the fight the Nazis reserved for themselves. Here's the Germany Hitler walked into. And here's what he wanted. First, Europe under his complete political or economic control, leaving Mussolini a share of the loot if he behaved himself. Then the drive to the east, through the rich oil lands of Iran and Iraq, into India. Another push south through Africa. Then from Dakar, jump off to meet the honorary Aryans who were to move in on South America through the Pacific. At the same time, start across from the Scandinavian countries to hook up with his buck-toothed pals coming over from Siberia to join in the conquest of the United States.
There it is, gents. All they left us was Shangri-La. And they'd claim that, too, if they knew where it was. If they had a chance, listen. When war comes between Japan and the United States, I shall not be content merely to occupy Guam, the Philippines, Hawaii, and San Francisco. I look forward to dictating the peace to the United States in the White House at Washington. Yamamoto wrote those words on January of 1941. Yes, the conquering Jap army down Pennsylvania Avenue. That was the final goal. You will see what they did to the men and women of Nanking, Hong Kong, and Manila. Imagine the field day they'd enjoy if they'd marched through the streets of Washington. But before striking, a preliminary step was necessary. From Berlin, from Rome, from Tokyo, the campaign started. Propaganda to confuse, divide, soften up their intended victims. Put them on the defensive. Scream you're abused. Shout you're oppressed. The world's wrong. You're right. If you shriek it loud enough and often enough, they'll believe you. Above all, use their free press and their free speech to destroy them.
Lebensraum, ja, Lebensraum, meine Volksgenossen.
Lebensraum, they demanded. Living room. Our lands are overcrowded. But at the same time, they gave prizes to mothers who bore the most sons. They brought together large groups of young men and young girls for human breeding. Read what one of their leaders wrote. Of course, the children from this assembly line belong to the state to be scientifically trained for conquest. Another howl was the lack of raw material. They claimed they were the have-nots and we were the haves. But out of this supposed lack, they built up the greatest war machines the world has ever known. These are the published figures from the German military budget. Actually, between 1933 and 1939, Hitler's program of rearmament cost more than $80 billion. The Nazis alone assembled a striking force of 30 panzer divisions, 70 motorized divisions, 140 infantry divisions, plus the Luftwaffe, the world's largest air force. And they had no raw materials. Think of the bread, the automobiles, the good things of life that the German, Italian, Japanese leaders might have given their people if they had spent this money for peace instead of war. You know what billions we are now spending to match their military force? No. No, these arguments were all smokescreens. When war came, the democracies proved to be the have-nots, and our enemies the haves. And when war came, where did it come? Remember that date, September 18th, 1931. A date we should remember as well as December 7, 1941. For on that date, in 1931, the war we are now fighting began. The place was Manchuria, the northernmost province of China, 6,000 miles from San Francisco. Manchuria, the first objective in the Tanaka Plan. By September 18th, the Japanese, who by treaty patrolled the southern Manchurian Railway, had secretly and illegally increased their garrisons. On the Korean-Manchurian border, an entire Japanese army was assembled, conveniently equipped for a winter campaign. All they needed was an excuse. They made their own. At 10:30 that night, just after the Mukden Express had passed by, a section of track was dynamited, causing damage to one rail and 2 fish plates. Japan's honor had been violated. Within half an hour, the Japanese railroad garrison launched a coordinated attack on the barracks of the sleeping Chinese army at Mukden. The slaughter was appalling. By midnight, the conveniently placed Japanese army poured across the Korean border, and the first open act of aggression, the invasion of Manchuria, was on. In 4 days, they had occupied the whole of southern Manchuria, and shortly after, the whole country. Manchuria became Manchukuo, a puppet state with an obedient stooge on the throne, Henry Puyi, a weakling whom the Japanese had prepared for the job with 7 years of women and song. In Washington, Henry L. Stimson, then Secretary of State, now Secretary of War, sent out a blistering denunciation of the attack. The League of Nations sent a committee of 5, headed by Lord Lytton and including our own General Frank McCoy, to Manchuria to investigate. In October of 1932, the committee issued its report.
We found that the Japanese occupation of this large part of China was not justified on the ground of self-defense, and that the new state which had been set up was a Japanese protectorate rather than a genuine case of Manchurian self-determination.
Shortly after, the League condemned Japan as an aggressor nation.
Son Excellence, Monsieur Matsuoka, délégué du Japon. I call on His Excellency, Monsieur Matsuoka, delegate of Japan.
It is a matter of common knowledge that Japan's policy is fundamentally inspired by a genuine desire to guarantee peace in the Far East and to contribute to the maintenance of peace throughout the world. Japan, however, finds it impossible to accept the report adopted by the Assembly.
In answer, the Japanese delegates, knowing there were no guns behind this condemnation, smiled, took up their briefcases, marched out of the League. Northern Manchuria was dead. Collective security was dead. The green light had been given the aggressors. We and the rest of the world knew that these aggressors should be stopped and punished. But we were unwilling to make the necessary sacrifices to back up that opinion. It was impossible to convince a farm boy in Iowa, or a driver of a London bus, or a waiter in a Paris cafe that he should go to war because of a mud hut in Manchuria. Yet the subsequent course of history makes it clear that that incident, so many miles away, is one of the main reasons that you and millions of others are in uniform today. The Japs had Manchuria. Phase number 1 of the Tanaka Plan was completed. Phase number 2, the conquest of China. In 1932, without warning, the Japs attacked the Chinese city of Shanghai. Here they met such stubborn resistance that they had to pour more than 75,000 troops into the local battle before capturing the city. This resistance made them decide to shift their campaign to the north, and in 1933 they added the province of Yehol to Manchuria. Yes, the Japs launched the second phase of the Tanaka Plan, but they had yet to finish it. A united nation stands against them. Under the inspired leadership of General Chiang Kai-shek, the Chinese people fought and still fight on. Meantime, what of Japan's partners? What helpless people were they planning to bomb, slaughter, drive into slavery? Hitler was not yet ready, but Mussolini was. Mussolini had to be. His people were growing restless. Fascism hadn't produced the heaven on earth that he had promised them. So he pulled the old trick of launching a foreign war to divert attention from troubles at home. So Mussolini beat his chest like Tarzan and looked around for a worthy foe. He found one, Ethiopia. A good country for the beginning of a glorious empire. Its army had no machine guns. Its army had no tanks. Its army did have an air force. Exactly one old airplane. One airplane against a nation which had developed the new theory of total air war. Of the blitz which would wipe out cities, destroy civilians, men, woman, and child. In October of 1935, following the Japanese example, an incident was provoked at the little settlement of Wall near the border of Ethiopia and Italian Somaliland. Italy's honor had been violated. Refusing any arbitration, Mussolini moved the whole might of his army through the Suez Canal to overrun the undefended country. Ethiopia's emperor, Haile Selassie, appeared before the League of Nations. I must still fight on until my tardy allies appear, and if they never come, I say to you without bitterness, the West will perish. Members of the League half-heartedly stopped trading with Italy, but refused the only thing that will stop any aggressor: force. Ethiopia was left to herself. Native leaders came to pledge their allegiance.
derecho. Guacamate, 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 guacamate.
The people of Ethiopia, with their spears and bare hands, faced the guns and the tanks of the invaders, fighting desperately and gallantly to save their country from conquest. And they died. But in the end, there could be but one result. Might triumphed. Italy conquered Ethiopia. Many of our elected leaders warned us of danger.
Without a declaration of war, and without warning or justification of any kind, civilians, including vast numbers of women and children, are being ruthlessly murdered with bombs from the air.
But we were still hypnotized by the fact that two broad oceans stood between us and the rest of the world. We didn't realize at the time when months were needed to span these oceans was ended, that the steamship had cut these months to days, and that now the whole Earth's surface could be covered in the space of hours. Yes, we were a nation that wanted peace. But we hadn't yet learned that peace for us depends on peace for all. Nobody would run the risk of war because of some mud huts and barren plains in Ethiopia, any more than we would run the risk for some similar huts and plains in Manchuria. Correctly interpreting our attitude, the aggressors were all the surer that they could get what they wanted. Japan had started on her march of conquest. Italy had begun her new empire. And now the third gangster. What about him? We'll take him up in our next film and show how he joined his partners and put in his bid. For this is what we are fighting. Freedom's oldest enemy. The passion of the few to rule the many. This isn't just a war. This is the free people's life and death struggle against those who would put them back into slavery. The free peoples of America and Britain, of Russia and China, of Canada, Australia, and all the 30 United Nations that have sworn that man shall still remain free. That is the cause in which we fight. We lose it, and we lose everything. Our homes, the jobs we want to go back to, the books we read, the very food we eat, the hopes we have for our kids, the kids themselves. They won't be ours anymore. That's what's at stake. It's us or them. The chips are down. Two worlds stand against each other. One must die, one must live. 170 years of freedom decrees our answer.
shadow of the conquering German armies covered Western Europe, the self-styled master race was riding high. Adolf Hitler stood just as Napoleon had stood more than 100 years before, and looked across the English Channel to the one fighting obstacle that stood between him and world domination. The chopped cliffs of Britain rose sheer and white out of the choppy waters. And beyond, a little island, smaller than the state of Wyoming. Crush that little island and its stubborn people, and the way was open for world conquest. The fall of Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Denmark, Norway, Holland, Belgium, France had given him more than 100 million slaves to work for him or starve. The preliminaries were over. It was time for the main event, the Battle of Britain. Hitler and his generals feverishly drafted their plans for the conquest of Britain. Every detail must be anticipated. A slip now might wreck the whole timetable of world conquest. 6 weeks of final preparation went into those plans. 6 weeks to determine the history of 1,000 years. The thing was foolproof. See for yourselves how simple the whole operation was to be. Look.
German plan for invasion of England. Phase 1. Knock out the Royal Air Force and its bases. Get control of the air and the sea lanes across the Channel. Follow the Blitz plan that had wiped out Poland, the Low Countries, and France. Destroy communication and transport lines. Above all, get command of the air. Phase 2. Pulverize the coastline with dive bombers. Drop parachute troops to take over the airfields and establish beachheads. Phase 3. Actual invasion. Pour the German panzer divisions across in high-speed barges under an umbrella protecting fighter planes. Then send spearheads of armed might to divide, surround, destroy all opposition. That's all there was to it. Conquer Britain. Force the surrender of the British fleet. Then, with the combined sea power of Germany, Britain, Italy, France, and Japan, he could control the seas and tell us where to head in. The torch of freedom flickered low.
On the Channel invasion coasts, more than 100 fully equipped German divisions were singing the Nazi theme song, "We are sailing against England," as they waited the word from Hitler. Here, for weeks, all the supplies and weapons of the Nazi war machine had been turned toward Britain. jaws of the Nazi whale were set to swallow Jonah.
And what about Jonah? How was he doing? Well, Britain also had an army, but it was an army dragged from the sea at Dunkirk. Without weapons. These had been left behind on the roads of France. Tanks, guns, motorized equipment, all abandoned to save the one priceless item, men. In all of Britain, there was not enough equipment for one modern division. Only one tank for every 1,000 square miles of territory. Only one machine gun for every 1,500 yards of beach. Britain had a navy, too, but it was scattered all over the globe, guarding vital food and supply lines. And the British knew it would be suicide to use their fleet in the narrow waters of the English Channel with the German Air Force in control of the air. Britain also had an air force. An air force outnumbered 10 to 1 by the enemy, both in men and machines. And then there was Britain herself, the people of Britain, the people who were to be terrorized and forced to surrender. They knew that every man, woman, and child, in uniform or out, would be Hitler's target in the onslaught that might come at any moment. They knew they had a job to do, and not much time to do it in. The young, the not so young, and the old. The clerk, the butcher, the farmer, the member of parliament, they formed the civilian army, Britain's home guard. They started from scratch. Experience, equipment, supplies, all were scarce. Only one shell to fire at each practice. The women of Britain refused to be left out.
We'll in this, too. We'll put up the barrage balloons. Man the ack-ack guns. We'll run the railroads and get the trains through on time. Ferry the planes. Carry the dispatches. Drive the ambulances and run the buses. And we'll see that our men are fed and don't go hungry.
Others work. Men and women alike. They worked full time, overtime, double time, 40 hours a week, 50, 60, 70. Hours meant nothing. Fatigue meant nothing. Until the government forced them to cut down hours because over-fatigue was hurting production. And when they weren't working, the men patrolled the moors for parachutists, blocked the roads, rehearsed invasion defenses. For something had happened here the Germans could never understand. In a democracy, it is not the government that makes war. It is the people. To lead them, the people had chosen Winston Churchill as their prime minister. And he spoke the words in every British heart when he said,
"We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on beaches, landing grounds, in fields, in streets, and on the hills. We shall never surrender."
This was Britain in its darkest hour. The people knew they were in for the worst the Nazi mind could invent, yet they didn't panic or run away. They patrolled and waited. They drilled and waited. They worked and waited. Waited for the terror they knew was coming. Then it came. That's the sound that became part of the life of every man, woman, and child in Britain.
August 8th, 1940, and the battle for Britain is on.
30 enemy aircraft over the channel, flying due west.
Here comes the Luftwaffe. In dozens of flights, hundreds of planes, bombers, fighters, dive bombers, across that 21 miles of channel, that 8 short minutes of water. Their first tactics were to bomb convoys in the channel. Convoys loaded with food and munitions, bound for the great port of London. German fighters waited overhead for the defending planes of the Royal Air Force, the RAF, to appear. They didn't have long to wait. RAF came, facing odds of 6, 8, 10 to 1, and dove in, shouting the old hunting cry, "Tally-ho!" Phase 1 of the Nazi plan called for the RAF to be knocked out of the air. But the men of the RAF hadn't read the Nazi plan. In the first 4 days, the RAF knocked 182 German planes out of the sky.
For the next week, the Germans attacked the coast cities from the Thames River to Weymouth.
cover.
Spitfire.
And Hitler paid off with 180 more planes.
Then the Luftwaffe battered the great port towns of Southampton, Plymouth, trying for a knockout before the flow of supplies from overseas became more than a trickle. The ports took a terrible pounding, but they couldn't be knocked out. Cargoes went on being unloaded with the protection of the RAF overhead. Battling the Spitfires and Hurricanes in the air wasn't panning out.
So Goering switched his main attacks to the fighter airfields, Dover, Deal, Woking. Maybe he could destroy the planes on the ground. He bombed the airfields, and the fields were hit. But the planes were saved. For Britain, unlike Poland and the Low Countries, didn't make the mistake of bunching its planes on the runways. The planes of the RAF were scattered and hidden, only a few on any one field, and those in the far corners. The Spitfires still went up to meet the enemy.
In the first 10 days of the Battle of Britain, Goering launched 26 major attacks to get command of the air and lost 697 aircraft. The British lost 153, and 60 British pilots bailed out. Valuable trained men were saved and ready to fight again, but the crews of Goering's planes were lost to him forever. The pace was too hot. Something was going haywire. The Nazis had to call time out. On a 2,000-mile front from Norway to France, the whole Nazi blitz program was being stalled because the RAF was still in the air. The shock troops were getting hoarse from singing, "We are sailing against England." The long-range German guns were getting hot from throwing shells across the channel. In public, Hitler assured the Germans, "Mr. Churchill tells his people that England will win, but I tell you that victory will belong to Germany." But in private, he sent for Goering, the boss of the Luftwaffe, and put him on the hot seat. Goering was told to do something and do it quick. So on August 30th, he ordered all-out attacks on inland aerodromes and industrial centers. Maybe he could knock out the RAF on the assembly line. And he adopted new tactics, too. More fighters and fewer bombers. Or maybe he just had fewer bombers to send. Anyway, those he did send were well protected. Fighters above at high altitudes. Fighters on both sides. Fighters in the front and in the rear. Fighters weaving in and out of the bomber formations.
Britain, winner of the first round, was ready. With higher morale and sharper defense, improved listening posts were set up all along the coast and warned of the enemy's approach before he left the continent. A quick flash from the control station to the fighter station, and pilots were on their way to meet the enemy while he was still over the channel. Day after day, out of sight and almost out of sound of the watchers on the cliffs, 4, 5, and 6 miles above, the battles raged over the Dover area. The Dover area area became known as Hell's Corner. By sheer weight of numbers, the enemy again and again broke through the coastal defenses. And reached inland to the airdrome. Aircraft plants, munition factories and machine shops.
Hello, gunfire in the southeast. Right.
The workers kept on working. And the RAF kept on flying. These few men with wings, alone in the sky, behind their motors and machine guns, were shooting down more than the Luftwaffe. They were smashing the whole Nazi plan of world conquest.
Johnny? 109 destroyed, Freddie, yes.
Oh, good show. How'd you get on, sir?
I had a wonderful party, thanks.
Are you all right? You get any of the batters?
Yes, I got a Messerschmitt 109 in Adonia.
Between August 24th and September 5th, 35 major attacks were launched. They cost the Germans 562 planes, while the British lost only 219 planes and saved 132 pilots. Invasion plans were going completely haywire. The Nazis were blind with rage. The German mind has never understood why free people fight on against overwhelming odds. Hitler now knew he was superior in every weapon except the weapon of spirit. So he told Goering, break that spirit, crush the people, crush the spirit of democratic life itself. Invasion now would have to wait. The Nazis would avoid the RAF and smash the great city of London into the rubble heap they had made of Warsaw and Rotterdam.
Could London take it? Even the people themselves didn't know the answer. The defenses they trusted in were London's hastily assembled anti-aircraft, the ack-ack guns, the balloon barrage which kept the raiders at high altitudes. The Royal Air Force, now down to its last reserves, and the plain, downright guts of people. They sent more children out of the city. Tightened air raid precautions. Stationed more airplane spotters. Rehearsed firefighters. Moved into bomb shelters. They blacked out their city and carried on.
The first blow aimed to crush the British spirit came on September 7th.
Bruce reports planes coming in. Control room speaking.
Customers and staff will now take cover in the basement. Please do not run, but keep moving.
Down the stairs, or you can use the escalator.
Sir, floor, clear.
Second floor clear.
First floor, clear.
That day, when 375 German planes came roaring up the Thames River, the Battle of Britain became the Battle of London. The Germans broke through the charge of Hurricanes and Spitfires that went out to meet them. Gone was any pretense of aiming at military objectives. This was just savage destruction. Fell alike on the homes of the East End poor and the Mayfair rich, on shops, hospitals, churches.
For 28 days, the Nazis were to drop everything in the book on the city of London. Tons upon tons of high explosives, delayed action bombs that exploded days later, torpedoes that sheared away whole buildings. And underneath the war in the air, the war of the man in the street went on. He learned to exist with very little food. He forgot what it meant to have a night's sleep, spending most of his time underground in the damp and dark and cold.
Hello, Mrs. Fox. You're here early tonight.
Well, I'm on the safe side, aren't I?
I think that'll be all right now.
Yes, that's grand.
Anyway, I'll be back in a few minutes if you want.
Now, how are we going to get you up there? Get a young man to lift you up. Barney?
Hello.
Tell this young lady to lift up.
Righto, I'm coming.
The air raid wardens stayed at their posts. Doctors and nurses worked on steadily as the bombs crashed all around them. Rescue squads labored night and day.
Hi, Gordon. I found her.
Is she dead?
Afraid so.
Firemen said, nuts to the bombs and battle to put out fires. This was life in the Blitz. Against all the rules of Nazi warfare, Britain was refusing to crumple up.
Across the Channel, the enraged Goering took personal command of the operations. And he sent the Luftwaffe into one of its greatest attacks. German bombers and Messerschmitt fighters roared over the English coast.
Starmouth calling. Planes heard 3 miles southwest.
Shout for hostile planes approaching from the southwest.
The British met the challenge by throwing in everything they had. Historic three-dimensional battle took place inside an area 60 miles long, 38 broad, and from 5 to 6 miles high. 100 individual dogfights took place within the first 30 minutes of the raid.
Right on our own doorstep. Oh, what a spread.
Center calling London 1. Thank you, Center. We'll keep a lookout for them. Hostile formation to the south.
Some of the German bombers broke through London's defenses. And reached the center of the city.
Doggy, the tin hat. Oh, the tin hats. Okay. Doggy! Doggy, where are you?
Blimey, I thought they'd got you.
Who, me? Nah, I had me fingers crossed.
Hostile raid, sir.
RAF wasn't much help at night. This was just German bombs against British guts.
Harvey? Hello, Jack.
Sound happy enough down there tonight, don't they?
Yes, they're all right.
The great docks of London were left roaring infernos. Homes were destroyed by incendiaries. Business blocks were aflame.
And still the people of London took it. Night after night, they burrowed underground. And morning after morning, they dug themselves out of the wreckage.
Good morning, Mrs. Floyd. Good morning, Mr. Arms. See you tonight. Right here. Come on, Betty. Would you like to sit down? Thanks.
Morning, Mr. Irons. Sleep well?
Fine, thanks. Wasn't it a quiet night?
What about the one that came down about 2?
I didn't hear it. Did you? No.
Oh, we're getting used to them around here.
to go away from this for a bit?
Of course not. It'd take more than this to get me out of my home. Now go on, you've got to get to work.
The Battle of London was the battle of the people of the city. In spite of bombs and fire and death, they got to their desks and workbenches to spend another 10 or 12 hours working, working, working. The British spirit was stronger than ever. And the RAF was flying higher than ever. Not only higher, but farther.
SIO, operation for the night. GP 1562, EP 781, 10 aircraft.
You'll find, I think, a decent photograph of the submarine yards there.
There's a very good one taken the other night, Monty.
Oh, that?
A bit further along.
That's it. Those are the submarine yards. Just there.
Yes.
Well, chaps, this is your target for tonight. It's the submarine and shipbuilding yards at Bremen. It's a vitally important target, and it's got to be hit hard.
In the midst of this life and death struggle, the British found strength not only to defend, but to counterattack with what few bombers they could get together.
Charlie airborne, sir.
Hello, rear gunner. Can you hear me?
I'm okay, Skipper.
Hello, operator. Everything okay?
Well, it seems to be all here, sir.
Stand by. I'm going in a glide.
Steady.
I got the bullseye with the last one.
Here was the RAF giving it back. Hitler cried, "Night gangsters! For this crime I will exact 1,000-fold revenge." All the available German night bombers were put into the air.
Thousand-fold revenge was Coventry. On the night of November 14th, £1 million of bombs were dropped on the city. Coventry was smashed as flat as Warsaw and Rotterdam. people of Coventry dug their loved ones out of the blasted ruin, saw them to their last resting place in a common grave.
Hitler could kill them, but damned if he could lick them. They went back to their lathes and machines, for they knew the machine bench was as deadly a weapon as the rifle. And in their hearts was a grim determination that this enemy must be destroyed. That the day was coming when they would strike back, and how they would strike back.
Christmas, 1940. Christmas, season of peace on earth, goodwill toward men, was the ironic quiet before Hitler's great burst of rage against a people who couldn't be licked. Bomb them into submission, so he would burn them to ashes.
Millions of firebombs rained down on the great city of London. Minutes, more than 1,500 different sections of the city burst into roaring flames. Flames that swiftly merged into the greatest fire in recorded history. In the midst of all the fire and destruction, vital water mains were shattered. Water pressure was almost entirely cut off. Heroes of the night were men of the London Fire Brigade who stretched temporary hose lines out to the center of the Thames River, struggling through mud and slime. For the Nazis had carefully picked a night on which the Thames River had one of the lowest ebb tides on record. While London burned above them, the people of the city held on, chin up and thumbs up. They knew this was the people's war, and they were the people. And a people that couldn't be panicked, couldn't be beaten. In the months to come, the British were to suffer many such bombings and burnings. But a nation that calls on cold courage when hot courage runs thin may die, but it can't be defeated. Battle of Britain was won, but not by Hitler. Hitler had lost the battle. He had lost 2,375 German planes and their crews. For the first time, it was the Germans who ate the bitter dirt of defeat. Gone was the legend of their invincibility. For a solid year, the Nazis struck Britain with all their might. They leveled thousands upon thousands of homes and damaged millions of others. They killed more than 40,000 men, women, and children, and seriously wounded 50,000 more. But not one single Nazi soldier set foot on British soil. But Hitler couldn't stop. And in our next film, we will show how he had to turn to the east again. Why did the Nazis lose the Battle of Britain? First, because a regimented people met an equally determined free people, and the free people made them quit cold.
We've been bombed, dive bombed, high-level bombed, machine gunned, been through 2 invasion scares. The last lot we had the house down about our ears. But we're still sticking it, and we're going to stick it.
Second, because this was a new kind of war, and the RAF were the men who could fight it. These were the men who belonged to what Hitler called those weak, soft democracies. The British did more than save their country. They won for the world a year of precious time. It was not only for the people of Britain, but for the people of the world that Winston Churchill spoke when he said,
"Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few."